name is John Boyens. I'm the Deputy Chief of the Computer Security Division over at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Wanted to give a quick thanks to the Institute for Critical Infrastructure Technology for setting this program up and inviting me to moderate the panel on what sectors are doing to secure their supply chains, which is our August panel right now. I'll briefly introduce the other panelists here. Chris Van Schendel, the Cybersecurity Director at Johnson & Johnson. Sherry Caddy, Senior Advisor, Cybersecurity at the Department of Energy. And Jamie Barnett, who's the Senior VP of Government Services for RigNet. He is a retired Navy Rear Admiral and former Chief of the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau of the FCC. So this panel is looking at the broader ecosystem of technology. This particular panel is really looking at the acquirers and the use of information and communication technologies at the various sector level. So NIST has done a little bit of work in the past, starting back in the 2008 era, looking at the government, which is also a critical infrastructure. And that's kind of where our expertise lie. And then right around the 2014-15 timeframe, we decided to go out and look at what the different industry sectors are doing in this course, right? So we've changed our perspective accordingly a little bit on where we view supply chain and kind of the problem space we're looking at. So we originally were just only looking at the organizational dependencies on information and communication technologies. We broadened that out a little bit to include the broader cybersecurity aspects in supply chain. So kind of the nexus between traditional information security and traditional logistics-based supply chain risk management. However, this panel is really just looking at the organizational dependencies on ICT, right? And that has changed over the several years, right? There's probably not a week, a month, or a year that goes by where there's not a cyber incident. What is happening over the last 10 years that I see is that the increase in the supply chain related cyber incidents has been increasing. And this is borne out by a lot of the statistics that are out there by both traditional supply chain, cyber insurance, some of the threat organizations, but the cyber incidences related to cyber supply chain risk management is increasing. So what part of our research when we started looking at industry and the different sectors is that all organizations have supply chains. I think one of my old colleagues made the statement that everyone has a supply chain, even God, right? If you look at things upstream and downstream. And that's true for all organizations. And what we found out is that sectors and subsectors look at their supply chains quite differently. And even within those subsectors, organizations look at their supply chains differently. Yet at the same time, I think I was on a panel not too long ago, and one of the panelists stated that for the federal government, we share 70 to 80% of all the same suppliers, right? So on the one hand, we're sharing suppliers. On the other hand, sectors look at supply chain differently and have different suppliers in there. So that's kind of what this panel is going to be looking at. It's kind of the difference from their organizations and their sectors, how they treat and how they look at supply chain risk and how they manage that risk. With that, I would like to hand it over to our first panelist, Chris Van Schendel, and have him talk about himself, where he fits in his organization, how they fit into the supply chain. Chris, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, John. Yeah, so appreciate the opportunity to talk on this panel. Yeah, so my name is Chris Van Skyndall. I work for Johnson & Johnson. Obviously, we're a large healthcare manufacturer of pharmaceuticals, medical devices, and consumer products. And my day job, I'm part of our information security risk management organization, specifically within the supply chain space. And there's two key areas of responsibility I have. The first is for our customer and logistics functions, and also more latterly for our third-party risk management program. And then kind of, I guess, extracurricular, I'm also the co-chair for the supply chain task group within the cyber working group of the Healthcare Sector Coordinating Council. Yes, so John, to touch on your question there in terms of, how does healthcare look at supply chain risk? I mean, I think for us, it kind of, as you might imagine, right, it starts with the patient, right? So patient risk, patient health, patient safety, lives are quite literally on the line. So that's a lens through which, we pretty much look at all of our cyber risk, including supply chain risk. There's obviously, huge data privacy implications as well. And I think maybe kind of what makes healthcare somewhat unique apart from that is just the breadth, right? It's a very complex and diverse ecosystem. You've got healthcare delivery organizations, right? Many of which run as not-for-profits and span from, large regional and national networks to, small rural clinics. You have, services like, labs, insurance. There's a lot of public sector institutions in there, and then you have manufacturers like J&J, and even within manufacturers, very diverse, right? We have pharmaceuticals, connected devices, surgical consumables, and all of that manufacture then in turn kind of backs into the non-healthcare supply chain, be it for raw materials or components or logistics or IT and OT, and so on. So yeah, very broad, very diverse. But I think for all that diversity, I think within healthcare, that there's a lot of collaboration around cybersecurity generally, and in particular around supply chain cyber concerns, right? And collaboration that really spans competitors. We put all of that aside, in the interests of patients. So we have a very strong health ISAC, information sharing and analysis center. We use that to share intelligence, on threats and IOCs and information, best practices. We also have the Healthcare Sector Coordinating Council, which I mentioned before, led by Greg Garcia. That gives us a great forum to bring together, the public health and health industry on the private sector side. And that organization has really put out some great work in the past couple of years. Just earlier this year, my task group, we put out our second version of our what we call SCRM. That's our health industry supply chain risk management guide. So it's a toolkit really aimed at kind of small to medium-sized healthcare organizations with guidance and best practice, but also very actionable templates and accelerators, contractual language, things that these organizations can take up quickly and help build out and mature their own supply chain risk management programs. HSCC is also doing work on standardized contractual language for medical devices, for example, and I think even beyond those bodies, right, that there's a very, I think supply chain risk management is very top of mind within healthcare. Individual leaders and organizations, right? You take Ed Gaudet, who's one of our key contributors on HCSCRM. His organization just put out a very thought-provoking healthcare risk ops manifesto that's worth a read. So yeah, healthcare I think really is defined by that kind of focus on the patient safety first and foremost, the diversity, but also that strong collaboration when it comes to cyber and supply chain risk.
Great, thanks, Chris. Next, Sherry, can you talk a little bit about the energy sector and your work there, please?
Sure. Thanks, John, and thanks for hosting the panel today. So as John said, I'm the Senior Advisor for Cybersecurity at the Department of Energy's Office of Cybersecurity, Energy Security, and Emergency Response. And this is our relatively new cybersecurity agency at the department. And we've taken a little bit of a different view of supply chain, as you noted in your upfront remarks, that each sector looks at this a little bit differently. And as I'm sure all of you are aware, the energy sector is a no-fail sector. That, if in cyber terms, confidentiality, availability, integrity, availability is job one for the energy sector. So we've put a heavy emphasis on testing and technical testing to understand what is in the supply chain of components that we're putting in industrial control systems. So I've been working in the technical area aspects of supply chain for a number of years now in the defense and intelligence community, really really getting away from the notion of having vendors self-attest to what is in their constituent software, chips, hardware components in the products that they're selling, and getting to better technical ways to assess at a more empirical level what is in there. And so to that end, at the Department of Energy, I run Energy's cyber vulnerability testing and enumeration program for digital subcomponents within industrial control systems in the energy sector. This is called the Citrix program, the Cyber Testing for Resilient Industrial Control Systems. It's a consortium of multiple Department of Energy national labs that have a considerable amount of expertise in both testing and unpacking software, firmware, digital components, hardware components. Really, we have a great bevy of engineers that are fantastic at tearing apart whatever we give them and finding what is really in there and developing automated tools to do that. So our cyber testing program is just getting rolling this year. It's been under development for a number of years. We did a major shakedown cruise of all of the constituent parts of it last year, and we are scaling up this year. As John, you noted earlier, there's no shortage of supply chain activities. It's not a new thing, but it is a newly concerning thing, as various adversaries have found that this is a really great way to scale their ability to get after us. So we are scaling up critical testing this year of where we think are the most prevalent, most critical, mitigatable vulnerabilities that we can find in major components and industrial control systems. Our testing program is a public-private partnership where we've signed and are in the process of signing additional legal agreements with critical manufacturers in the energy sector for industrial control systems. And that partnership is really critical as we understand that this is a joint concern. So we can't, while we can go and purchase manufacturers' products and give them to the engineers to tear apart, really what we were trying to do in the process of this is to get after vulnerabilities and mitigations. And we can't do that without the cooperation of these manufacturers. So we are signing agreements up front to have the manufacturers provide those components to us and share the results of that testing. And so this has really started to take off as a great program, and we think it's going to give us considerably more fidelity on what is included in these critical systems that are no-fail systems that must be available. Also, with regard to testing, we, again, recognizing that the partnership with our sector, both manufacturers and asset owners, is critical to achieving more security in this area. We did stand up at congressional direction a new task force called the Securing Energy Infrastructure Executive Task Force. We stood this task force up last year. We got congressional direction to do so in the FY 2020 National Defense Authorization Act. Again, Congress recognizing that the energy sector really has to pay more critical attention to doing more to secure our supply chains and working with the stakeholders in this area. So our Securing Energy Infrastructure Executive Task Force is a CPAC group comprised of manufacturers and asset owners, the national labs, federal partners, and academia, really bringing together a unique set of stakeholders that don't necessarily come together in the sector coordinating council framework that DHS has laid out, but sort of blending a little bit of a couple of different sectors for the energy sector to come together to jointly address these issues, to not only identify, mitigate, share vulnerabilities, but ultimately to engineer out vulnerabilities. So we're really trying to get upstream to the point where we can pursue what we're calling cyber-informed engineering, security by design, influence the engineer community that doesn't necessarily get as much cybersecurity as we might like to see, to get them to consider design security principles in everything they build and how they engineer systems. So that is a critical piece of our work. And also, of course, we're all coping with the SolarWinds vulnerability that was announced in December, and the strategic technical response to that, being a supply chain related concern, is to again get after how do we do a better job of understanding what is in there for all of these components, and we know that just telling a manufacturer, an OEM, to be responsible for the supply chains of all of your sub-tier suppliers is simplistic and not necessarily practicable. So we are advancing a number of different pilots in the energy sector that we've launched starting in January to really look at advancing the cause of the bill of materials approach to these critical digital components. So we launched a software bill of materials pilot with Commerce Department and TIA in January to do a proof of concept for the energy sector to show that we can create an automated, standardized format for the digital ingredients and software and exchange that amongst organizations. We will be launching a HBOM hardware bill of materials program shortly, again, to demonstrate that this could be done in an automated and standardized fashion for an energy sector use case, as well as a digital bill of materials program also in the coming month. So we think that taking the bill of materials approach both creates a standard format to empirically, in an automated fashion, get at those digital ingredients and create that as an emerging medium of exchange for supply chain related information so that folks can make a visibly informed risk decision based on commercial transactions with manufacturers and suppliers. So we hope to see more of that advance in the future. We also have some supply chain illumination programs, but we're really looking at, as you might expect in the energy sector, with our national labs as our fantastic resource, we're really looking at how do we get after this from a technology perspective. Thanks, and back to you, John.
Great, thanks, Sherry. Wow, that's a lot of work going on you have there. Same as with the health sector, since it's been a few years since I looked at both those sectors, and I'm pretty impressed. That is moving the ball forward. Next, Jamie, can you talk a little bit about your sector and some of the work you do in the multiple sectors that you're in? Because I know you do a lot of support work there. So, Jamie.
Right. Well, John, thanks so much for having me, for Eyesight, for sponsoring this, and this great panel that I'm already learning from. So I am a retired Rear Admiral in the Navy. I also spent 3 years at the Federal Communications Commission as the chief of the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau, where I really became familiar with John and others who work so deeply in this field. Now I'm Senior Vice President of RigNet. RigNet is a satellite and terrestrial communications technology cybersecurity company that primarily serves the oil and gas industry. So we have about 1/3 of the world's oil rigs, around the world. But we also provide the communications with enterprise communications with extremely large petrochemical plants, very remote land exploration. And we have a worldwide MPLS network that goes with that. And because a lot of these companies are the most attacked companies in the world, we also provide supplementary or complete cybersecurity for their communications. So Sherry mentioned no fail. So I think it's important for us all, just as Chris did, to kind of talk about the criticality of each of our critical infrastructures. So RigNet sits at kind of the confluence of communications infrastructure, but also the oil and gas industry, that side of the energy sector. If one of these rigs will have somewhere between 50 and 150 people, hundreds of miles out to sea for 21 days, very harsh, potentially dangerous environment. If communication breaks for any reason, their lives are at risk. Each one of these rigs has about 6,000 sensors that need continuous monitoring. If the rig loses communications, the rig itself has to shut down. That can be millions of dollars a day, and you don't just turn them on with a key. You turn them off, it may take a day or two to get everything back up. So obviously these large corporations like Chevron, BP, and the people that own the rigs themselves are extremely interested in reliability, availability, and cybersecurity. So consequently, we pay a lot of attention to enterprise risk management and have incorporated cybersecurity supply chain risk management into that. And that, whether that means bringing in and actually, looking at, examining any type of update, upgrade, testing our own equipment. Maybe we don't test every piece of equipment that goes out over the world, but we will test several of them because we do our own military type hardware encryption, an actual box. We visit the chip manufacturer. We know about what it is. We have relationships with them. They are audited. We want to know what their practices are. You mentioned the solar winds. We extensively, because we protect other people's communications networks, we use a bunch of tools like that, and including solar winds. And this is just a one-off because this wouldn't have solved everything. But we were not hit by the solar winds problem, and the reason is because of the procedures that our people in that area actually look at. They bring it in. They say, okay, you've got an upgrade. What is it? What does it do? And in our particular instance, it was an app that we didn't use for solar winds, so we didn't install it. And consequently, our systems were not affected by the problem. Now, if it'd been another type of upgrade that we did use, we would certainly have been there. But we do think that being aware and looking all the way up down to our third-party suppliers is critically important, and making sure that it's completely incorporated into our enterprise risk management. We're communicating with both our customers about their needs and with our suppliers. John?
Great, thanks, Jamie. And I think that, I think that highlights something that I'm continuously harping on in terms of just the basics of not only supply chain risk management, but just cybersecurity, and that's the know, right? Know what technology you're putting in your system. That's a great SolarWinds story. So next, I think we're going to turn to some questions. I think a lot of your kind of the background and your organizations and your sectors, you answered a couple of my first questions I had off the bat. But the next one is when I was listening to you all talk, again, I kind of made the point that a lot has changed since I originally looked at some of the different sectors back in 2014, 15, and 16. Where do you all see the changes happening from, let's say, 10 years ago, the last 5 years, and even the last couple of years? What sort of trends do you see in both the risks as well as how you manage those risks? And if we can start with Chris again, that would be great. Please, Chris.
Yeah, sure, John. Thanks for the question. I think it's a great one. Yeah, maybe the way I kind of think about it is very much as maybe I think Sherry kind of gave us that, confidentiality, integrity, or availability type viewpoint. I think but for me, it's been the change over the last 10 years has probably been a progression through that list, right? You know, if we go back where supply chain risk management happened at all 10 years ago, you know, it was very much around the confidentiality type risks, right? So, you know, protected health information, PII, intellectual property, you know, certainly talking about healthcare, right? So very much around the confidentiality type risks. And then as, you know, industry trends have, you know, moved towards everything as a service, everything becoming connected, including medical devices, you know, manufacturers within healthcare, you know, we've taken part in, or we're taking part in, you know, in Industry 4.0, you know, all of that technology is a double-edged sword, right? And so it makes us faster and better and cheaper and more able to, you know, serve our patients, but it also, you know, makes us more vulnerable. And so I think, I mean, I probably look at 2017 with NotPetya and WannaCry as kind of a watershed where, you know, and it's not an or, right? It's an and. So as well as that confidentiality lens, the availability piece really got layered on top, right? You know, and since then we've had the explosion of ransomware. So, you know, availability of you know, third parties and third party systems, the availability to get product through the supply chain has really been key. And then I guess, you know, and over the last 2 years or so, you know, I guess roundabout, and in a way it kind of started with NotPetya, right, from a supply chain, software supply chain perspective, but, you know, we've seen more around more risks around the integrity of the software, you know, and be it, you know, medical devices themselves or the software we use internally to run our business, the equipment that we run to, you know, we use to run our supply chains, and that could be, you know, off the shelf software, the Golden Tax, or, you know, SolarWinds that we've talked about here, but also within the open source world, right? There's been, you know, issues with Apache struts, or, you know, poison dependencies within, you know, the JavaScript, or, you know, more recently the Go ecosystems, right? So I think really looking at it as a progression from confidentiality through, you know, then building on availability and now building on integrity. Yeah, that's kind of how we're looking at the evolution, and yeah, that's absolutely influencing how we're going about managing that risk, right? You know, how do we get from point in time assessments and you know, questionnaires and asking vendors what their policies are to really more real-time assurance, deeper assurance, technical monitoring of what's going on, and ability to respond, you know, be, you know, threat intelligence, be it you know, kind of ongoing monitoring of issues, and as I think, as you know, both the other panelists pointed out, really, you know, kind of knowing what we have on our network, knowing what it's made out of, knowing what's in our devices, right, and what that's made of, and being able to, you know, respond timely.
Great, thanks, Chris. Sherry, I'm hopefully I'm not going to usurp what you were going to say, but I love the energy sector because it was eye-opening to me a few years ago when I was at a utilities conference, and they were talking about supply chain. I think this was there were a lot of new folks in the room, and one of the very intelligent utilities managers, risk managers, stood up, and he's just like, we have to weigh what we do, right? We have to figure out what the real risks are. And he came out and he said, you know what our biggest risk is? And everybody was like expecting, you know, some adversarial, and he said squirrels, right? Right? It puts things in perspective when you're looking at the organization and, you know, how they look at availability and everything. But I'll hand it over to you with my little squirrel story.
Yeah, what are you doing about squirrels, Sherry?
I've certainly heard that that anecdote, and yeah, I think, you know, when you have a no-fail mission like energy, you know, that they definitely look at it in a very holistic way, and you know, the outcome is the same. And as we saw recently with the incident, the weather-related incident in Texas, that just because it's from a physical incident, the impact tends to be the same. So while I was grateful that that wasn't a cyber-based incident, you know, how we, you know, it offers us lessons on how we would respond and need to respond to the impact of loss of power. So I think kind of tagging back to the question, the changes for the past many years, we've really progressed as, from a cybersecurity standpoint, as we've hardened the perimeter, which we spent quite a bit of time doing. The adversaries looking for a different way in from just brute forcing on the perimeter, and supply chain offers a fantastic way to do that. And as we've had, a sort of worldwide uptick in just the availability of compute power, that lends itself to the ability to really fragment supply chains globally and produce more devices, more software, more things abroad. Also, trends like M&A in industry, just more and more companies aggregating more and more components, software applications, things that are purchased, cobbled together, and put out on the street for commercial purposes without the entities necessarily understanding well what it is in their constituent products, debranding the constituent parts that came into those products. So all of these trends, I think, are driving us towards increasing supply chain risks, vulnerabilities, activities. So I think we're going to see a lot more of this because of all of those trends. And one of the other key trends, certainly within traditional IT and communications, but also in the energy sector, is the the Internet of Things. And as we are connecting, and also in the healthcare sector, I should say, as we're connecting more and more devices, more and more automated devices, you're creating additional distributed networks. We're changing the risk pattern. So with energy, the trend is all towards distributed energy resources. As you think about increasing folks having solar panels on their roofs and wind localized distribution and generation of energy in a way that gets away from that central substation hub and spoke model. We'll still have that, but we're going to be increasingly distributed. So we can't test we can't look at every installation of every solar panel on every consumer's roof. So we really need to spend more time at the manufacturer level to make sure that those components are secure before we deploy them out into the world, especially in this more increasingly distributed architecture that we expect to see in the energy sector. So that's definitely a reason why we're prioritizing that conversation, and making sure that we understand for components, especially traditional components in traditional architecture, centralized architecture in the energy sector. The components also become compromised when they're in the field. So the forensics of looking at, hey, did a vulnerability enter into the system at the manufacturer level? Is it a supply chain vulnerability from that standpoint that we need to look at the mitigations for, or was it something that came into the picture when it was in deployment? So that's a very different problem set, but both are very important, and we're looking to address both in the most robust fashion going forward.
Great, thanks, Sherry. Jamie, do you want to add to that?
Sure. Coming at it from the communications industry primarily, it's been interesting over the years to see the level of recognition of the problem. I remember, I think it was the 2009-2010 timeframe when the governmental tool for addressing some of the concerns about Chinese-made communications equipment was Secretary of Commerce Gary Luck calling one of the major carriers and saying, "We don't think this is a good idea." Now, from that, we've seen executive orders and legislation where there's more recognition of this, and still, it's not like it's not a problem. And part of that is that security costs money, and so it's one thing to say don't do this when someone is offering you the best deal. I think that we're seeing more and more now where the investment in security makes sense both from the marketplace, but also the government is willing to provide things such as Sherry's efforts right there to assist and make sure that we're secure. I think it's incredibly important. She mentioned the industrial IoT, and we're providing communications to remote locations for pipelines, various things like that. So there's intelligence, passive intelligence to be gained. There's potential of disruption and breaking the availability of all of that, disruption. Consequently, when we bring things in, we look at it before any type of software or control update goes out. We encrypt it before it goes out to the remote locations, and we're looking at encryption as more and more as a major tool in protecting our communications against supply chain attacks.
Great, thanks, Jamie. So I'm going to throw my own out there, and this just comes to the top of my mind after listening to you all talk. But the thing that I was most impressed with in terms of what you all were saying in terms of what has changed back from what I recall, and Jamie, I remember I think we met over the Secretary Locke phone call. So those. It was a fond memory meeting you, but perhaps not the best way. But what I noticed from what you all were saying is the collaboration. The collaboration that is going on now seems to be much more robust than it was 8 years ago or 10 years ago, from what I recall. And just the fact that you have so many stakeholders involved, right? It's a supply chain. So there's going to be lots of different types of organizations. Nobody can do it on their own. And then really impressed with the healthcare sector where, it's the baseline. Our goal is patient safety, and let's put the competition behind that. That's incredibly heart lifting, and what I tend to be fairly curmudgeon-y on the supply chain issue after seeing many 3 steps forward and 4 steps back. That seems like a big one going forward. So I'm going to turn back to you again, Jamie. Let's reverse a little order. I was going to ask you, in terms of implementing, kind of the cybersecurity aspect of supply chain risk management, what do you think organizations have the most difficult time with in terms of implementation? And this could be internal influences within, the functions of the organization, or externally as well with their supply chain.
Sure. So, John, the thing that comes to mind then is making sure that it's not only supply chain risk management with regard to cybersecurity in general. And everybody knows that the main corporate problem is often, cybersecurity, yeah, contact the IT folks, it's their problem. So being able to push both cybersecurity and cyber supply chain risk management throughout the organization is a major challenge. Now, we are a cybersecurity company, provided, so we are completely risk management framework, implemented not just at the corporate level, but throughout our worldwide networks. And we try to push, down to the people that are doing our acquisitions and purchasing, the understanding that this is important, testing, not incorporating things onto it, buying things that we don't need to, that haven't been vetted. And then there's also a certain amount of executive leadership that's required in executive training. And so it's very helpful that we have a CEO who can spell SCRM and make sure that it is something that is baked into our enterprise risk management, which generally a lot of corporations really understand and incorporate, but it's making sure that the supply chain is part of that. And so far we've been pretty fortunate in there. And it's just like you said. I mean, I think that collaboration that you mentioned comes from a realization that this is really important. And while we've seen some fantastic failures accumulate over the years, I think with each one, it's a little bit more of an inoculation. Oh, this is really important, and it needs to go throughout the organization.
Great, thanks, Jamie. And I'm not sure. I think we're getting closer to the end, so I'm actually going to add on a little bit of a question because Jamie touched on it right there. So Sherry, over to you, but I want to add on not only what do you think organizations have the most difficult time implementing, but does cyber supply chain risk management receive kind of the C-suite attention? I know, like, you know, a few years ago, and probably still, we still have that issue with cybersecurity, but how about cyber supply chain?
Yeah, John. So I think I think you hit it, and I agree with Jamie's point that we really have to keep talking about enterprise risk management to get all folks in the C-suite to understand that this isn't just something that's in the IT ghetto, or if it's supply chain, that it's in the procurement acquisitions ghetto somehow. But this is really an enterprise level concern that requires different roles, responsibilities, and attention from different parts of any organization. And as I said, and I think it's particularly relevant for the energy sector because there's such a large amount of system engineering, and engineers play such an important role in designing, integrating all of the different components within systems within the sector. And as I said, that integration is changing as we introduce new technologies, new distributed technologies like renewables, that those engineers, senior engineers that are signing off on those designs really need to understand supply chain risk and really need to understand the risk of what they're putting in their systems. Because a lot of times we see ways to engineer out simple risks that could be architected out if you just rearranged the components, something in front of the firewall, behind the firewall. Simply rearranging some of the way that you architect your system can reduce risk considerably. So getting to those engineers and getting them to understand the risks that they're introducing into their systems, that this isn't just something for procurement people or something for the CIO and the CISO, but that everybody has a role to play, and it's a really critical role, and that unity of effort is required to really get after what is a holistic risk to the enterprise.
Great, thanks, Sherry. And over to you, Chris. Difficult and C-suite.
Yeah. So for all the progress we've made, certainly as a company and for sure as a sector, I think some of the fundamentals are still challenges, right? Knowing which suppliers are critical, getting ahead of the selection of suppliers, and making sure that we make the cyber posture of those suppliers or those products, part of the decision criteria. So, I think that continues to be a challenge. I'd also say, from a sector perspective, just kind of increasing the level of consistency in terms of, making sure that everybody in healthcare is challenging the common suppliers that we have in the same way, right? And that's been a key part of what we've tried to do with the SCRM, is to really enable those small and medium-sized organizations to also demand better of their suppliers. And so I think the more everybody starts to hear from everybody else, okay, this is table stakes, right? This is something we expect you to do. Then I think that's gonna, like I said, I think that's gonna raise the tide for all ships. So we kind of need to make sure that it's not just the larger players leading from the front, but we're enabling everybody to demand better. In terms of C-suite, I mean, yeah, certainly within J&J, I mean, we are super fortunate to have, a bunch of very forward-thinking supply chain leaders, and yes, cyber risk is absolutely top of their agenda. I think we within the security organization have done a good job in terms of getting out there and explaining cyber risk as business risk, right? And for sure we've had the headlines to support that, which is I think that always helps as well, right? You never waste a good crisis. And I think that the next evolution of that really is where we need to take it, right? It's like, how do we, and back to the squirrels, right? How do we make cyber just another failure mode, right? How do we give our businesses, our segments, a more 360 view of risk, of which cyber is one flavor on top of financial or citizenship or quality or labor disputes or natural disasters, right? I think, once we can get it to that enterprise risk framework and embed cyber within it, I think that's where, everything really comes together and we kind of embed the success.
Great, thanks, Chris. So I'm gonna end on a the what would each of you want the audience to walk away from this from? And if they're new to this topic or have not yet started doing anything, what could they do immediately? Let's go alphabetical again. Jamie, you wouldn't mind?
Well, sure. So I guess those are kind of, those overlap, right? So the one thing I would say is there are best practices that each corporation, each sector can use, and that includes your recent publication, John, with I believe it's 8276. I mean, those need to be read and pushed. And then the second thing, making sure that you do push it out throughout the organization. Just as Sherry was saying earlier, this really needs to be part of every decision. The CEO needs to know it. It needs to be part of enterprise risk management. And then really to stay focused on the entire procurement process. If you're engineering or integrating something and somehow or another a cost problem comes up, don't let that be a break in your supply chain risk management.
Great. Thanks, Jamie. Sherry?
So I'll just say, other than awareness, because of course to manage risk you have to understand it and be able to see it. So awareness is always critical, always key for the whole enterprise. But I think we are doing a lot within the energy sector and have a number of programs to encourage our asset owners to think like the adversary. So because a lot of critical energy systems are very unique, very customized to sites. Only the operators really understand their sites. It's hard for us to give specific advice, but those operators in turn know how to crash their site. So if they think like an adversary, think like a red team perspective, and think about what are the kinds of things that could go wrong and how an external party might accomplish those, that's kind of a first key step in thinking about how to manage those risks. So we have a couple of programs underway in that regard, and I think that's got a lot of promise for the sector.
Great, thanks, Sherry. Chris?
Yeah, I would only, I think, echo what Jamie and Sherry have said. I mean, I think, start by reaching out certainly within the healthcare sector. There's resources out there, right? The HICSCRM, other resources from HSCC, HISAC, get engaged. I don't think there's any need for anybody to start from scratch. And then, start with internally within the organization, right? Let's start with where the risk is, right? Which suppliers are most critical to the mission of your organization, and then dig in from there, right? I think, it doesn't, don't have to eat the elephant in one sitting, right?
No, that's perfect, especially going last. There's not much left over, and I'll even top onto that and say, do something, right? I mean, if you want to run, you want to fly, you got to crawl first. So it doesn't matter what direction, just start crawling, start collaborating. I think there's lots of information out there. That's one of those things that have changed over the last few years. We're no longer developing standards. It's that awareness piece, and it's opportunities like Eyesight's given us today that it helps with the awareness. So, big hats off to them for putting this on, and a big, huge thanks to you three for coming here and, giving the community back a little bit and letting them know about the resources and the expertise that you guys all are offering. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure moderating this panel, and hopefully we're going to meet on another panel soon. So thank you very much.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.